November 14th, 1943, 0547 hours. Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. Private First Class Robert Martinez, 22 years old, pressed himself into the mud behind a fallen coconut palm. His M1 Garand felt inadequate, pathetically inadequate against what was coming. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he could hear them, the distinctive crack of Japanese Nambu machine guns, closer now, maybe 150 yards. His squad had been pinned down for 40 minutes. Every time someone moved, bullets tore through the jungle canopy above them. Then Martinez saw it. Sergeant William Hutchison was setting up something that looked wrong. Too big for a rifle, too small for a machine gun. It was an M1 Garand. Martinez could see the familiar profile, but the barrel was grotesquely thick, massive, and Hutchison was feeding it from a 20-round box magazine, not the standard 8-round clip. The sergeant locked the magazine into place, pulled back the charging handle, and settled behind a log. What Martinez didn't know yet was that Hutchison was holding the first battlefield deployment of one of the war's strangest weapons, the T13 Garand, chambered in .50 caliber. The same round that punched through aircraft aluminum at 30,000 feet was about to unleash hell in the jungle. Hutchison squeezed the trigger. By mid-1943, American forces advancing across the Pacific faced a brutal tactical problem that was costing lives every single day. Japanese defensive positions, bunkers constructed from coconut logs and coral, fortified caves in volcanic rock, reinforced pillboxes with 6-inch concrete walls, were proving nearly impervious to standard infantry weapons. The M1 Garand, firing the .30-06 Springfield round, was an excellent battle rifle. At 9.5 pounds with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second, it gave American infantry a significant advantage in open combat. But against hardened positions, it was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. The statistics told a grim story. On Guadalcanal, infantry companies reported spending an average of 4,200 rounds of .30-06 ammunition to neutralize a single reinforced bunker position. At Tarawa in November 1943, the 2nd Marine Division suffered 3,407 casualties in just 76 hours, many of them cut down while attempting to approach positions that couldn't be suppressed by rifle fire. Traditional doctrine called for waiting for artillery or naval gunfire support. But in the dense jungles of the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, getting fire support to the right position at the right time was often impossible. Radio communications failed in the heavy vegetation. Forward observers couldn't see targets. Artillery shells detonated in the jungle canopy 80 feet above the ground, inflicting minimal damage on dug-in positions below. The Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, firing the same .30-06 round at 550 rounds per minute, helped but wasn't enough. Japanese bunkers typically featured firing slits only 6 inches wide and 4 inches tall, positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire. A soldier with a BAR could suppress a position temporarily, but the 20-pound weapon firing from a 20-round magazine couldn't deliver the sustained, precise armor-penetrating fire needed to actually destroy the fortification. The .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun could do the job, firing 750 grain bullets at 2,810 feet per second, delivering 13,350 foot-pounds of energy. The M2 could punch through 5 inches of concrete or 16 inches of coconut log. But the M2 weighed 84 pounds. Add the tripod, 44 pounds, and you had a 128-pound weapon system that required a crew of 3 to 4 men to move and operate. In jungle terrain, where soldiers struggled through mud, up volcanic slopes, across rivers, through vegetation so thick you needed machetes to advance, getting an M2 to the fight often proved impossible. At Bougainville in New Guinea, December 1942 to January 1943, the 32nd Infantry Division reported that of 12.50 caliber machine guns assigned to forward positions, only 2 actually reached the front lines. The rest bogged down in swamps or were abandoned when their crews became casualties. Infantry commanders sent desperate requests up the chain. They needed the firepower of a .50 caliber weapon in a package one man could carry and operate. They needed something mobile enough to move with assault teams, quick enough to engage suddenly appearing targets, accurate enough to hit those narrow firing slits. They needed the impossible, a portable .50 caliber rifle. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department had actually been considering this exact problem since 1940. Springfield Armory engineers knew that scaling up a semi-automatic rifle to fire .50 caliber ammunition presented enormous challenges. The recoil force of a .50 BMG round was approximately 6 times that of a .30-06. A standard M1 Garand action would be destroyed by the first shot. The weapon would need to be massively reinforced, which meant massive weight increase. Early calculations suggested any semi-automatic .50 caliber rifle would weigh at least 35 pounds, heavy but still portable by a single trained soldier. If you want to see how American ingenuity turned an impossible request into a weapon Japanese soldiers would literally run from in terror, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You're about to witness one of the strangest weapons experiments of World War II. Back to Sergeant Hutchison and that impossible rifle. The weapon Hutchison gripped in the mud of Bougainville was officially designated the T13 Garand. Those soldiers who used it called it the Monster Garand, the Big Stick, or simply Maud's little brother. Japanese forces had their own name for it, Bakemono-jū, Monster Gun. Springfield Armory had begun development in earnest in January 1942, led by Chief Engineer John Garand himself, the same Canadian-born designer who had created the M1 Garand. The challenge was mechanically fascinating and brutally complex. The M1 Garand operated on a gas system. Expanding gases from the fired cartridge were tapped from the barrel and drove a piston which cycled the action. For .30-06, this system was elegant and reliable. 4.50 BMG, generating 5 times the chamber pressure and 3 times the bolt thrust, the entire mechanism needed to be reimagined. Garand's team started with the basics. The barrel was bored from a solid steel forging, 42 inches long, compared to 24 inches on a standard M1. The barrel alone weighed 12 pounds, more than an entire M1 Garand. The chamber had to withstand 55,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. The barrel diameter at the breech was 1.8 inches, tapering to 1.2 inches at the muzzle. A massive flash suppressor, 4 inches in diameter and 6 inches long, helped control the blinding muzzle flash that would otherwise give away the shooter's position instantly. The receiver was machined from a single block of hardened steel, reinforced at every stress point. Where a standard M1 receiver weighed 1.7 pounds, the T13 receiver weighed 6.2 pounds. The bolt was redesigned with 8 locking lugs instead of the M1's 2, distributing the massive forces across a wider surface. The operating rod, which in a standard M1 was a simple steel tube, became a heavy-duty forging with a diameter nearly twice that of the original. The gas system required complete redesign. Engineers calculated that the gas port needed to be positioned 28 inches from the breech, compared to 20 inches on the M1, to allow sufficient pressure drop before tapping gas for the operating cycle. A massive gas cylinder 3 inches in diameter housed a piston that weighed 14 ounces. The entire bolt assembly of a standard M1 weighed only 11 ounces. Recoil was the nightmare scenario. A .50 BMG round generates approximately 36 foot-pounds of free recoil energy. For comparison, a .30-06 generates about 6 foot-pounds. Fire a .30-06 from a lightweight rifle, and you get sharp push. Fire a .50 BMG from the same weight rifle, and you get a broken collarbone. Garand's team incorporated a massive recoil buffer system, spring-loaded assemblies that absorbed energy over a longer stroke, spreading the force over time. The buttstock was redesigned with thick rubber pads and additional padding. Even so, firing the T13 was described by test shooters as like being kicked by a mule. The magazine system presented another challenge. The standard M1 used an 8-round end-block clip that ejected after the last round. For a .50 caliber weapon, this was impractical. The cartridges were simply too large. Engineers designed a detachable box magazine holding 20 rounds. The magazine itself weighed 4.3 pounds when empty, 8.7 pounds when fully loaded with 20 rounds of .50 BMG ammunition. Final specifications: 48 inches overall length. Weight unloaded, 37.5 pounds. Weight with loaded magazine, 46.2 pounds. Rate of fire, semi-automatic only, approximately 30 rounds per minute with a trained operator. Effective range, 1,800 yards against personnel, 1,200 yards against fortified positions. Maximum range, 4,200 yards. The first prototype was completed in April 1942. Test firing at Aberdeen Proving Ground revealed immediate problems. The initial gas system design was too violent, battering the receiver and cracking the operating rod after just 200 rounds. The magazine catch broke during testing. The recoil broke 2 test shooters' wrists. Garand's team went back to the drawing board, redesigning the gas system 3 times, strengthening the receiver, completely restructuring the recoil buffer system. By September 1942, they had a weapon that worked. It was heavy. It was brutal to shoot, but it worked. Accuracy tests showed 3-inch groups at 100 yards, 18-inch groups at 600 yards, more than adequate for the intended purpose. Penetration tests demonstrated the weapon could punch through 8 inches of coconut log, 6 inches of concrete, or 3/4 of an inch of armor plate. Reliability tests showed the weapon could fire 1,000 rounds between stoppages, acceptable for infantry use. The War Department authorized limited production in December 1942. Springfield Armory was tooled up to produce 500 units. The designation was T13 Garand Heavy Rifle Caliber .50. Priority went to Marine divisions preparing for amphibious assaults and Army divisions fighting in the Pacific jungle campaigns. Sergeant Hutchison had received his T13 just 72 hours earlier. The weapon arrived in a wooden crate marked Fragile, Experimental Ordnance. A technical manual, 16 pages long, detailed assembly, operation, and maintenance. Hutchison, a pre-war competitive shooter from Montana who had joined the Marines in 1940, spent an entire afternoon at the rear area firing range, putting 60 rounds through the weapon. His shoulder was purple-black with bruising. His wrists ached, but he understood what he had: a portable bunker buster. Now, at 0547 hours on November 14, 1943, with his squad pinned down and Japanese positions invisible in the jungle darkness, Hutchison prepared to use it for real. The Nambu fire was coming from approximately 140 yards, bearing 320 degrees. Hutchison couldn't see the bunker, but he could see the muzzle flashes, strobing orange light, 3 bursts every 5 seconds. Disciplined fire from an experienced crew. Standard doctrine would be to call for mortar support, but the 81mm mortar teams were 300 yards back, supporting a different sector. The company's 2 bars were already hammering away, but the Japanese fire hadn't slackened. Hutchison settled the T-13's massive buttstock into his shoulder, leaning forward to absorb the coming recoil. The weapon had basic iron sights. No optics had been developed yet, and in the pre-dawn darkness, Hutchison could barely make out the front sight post. He aimed at the muzzle flash, leading slightly to account for the weapon's position behind the flash. He squeezed the trigger. The concussion was overwhelming. The muzzle blast blew leaves and debris back past Hutchison's face. The flash illuminated the jungle for 30 yards in every direction. The recoil drove him back 6 inches, even braced as he was. But through the chaos, Hutchison saw the effect. The .50 caliber round, a 750 grain boat tail traveling at 2,810 feet per second, covered 140 yards in 0.14 seconds. It hit the coconut log bunker with 13,350 foot-pounds of energy, punching completely through the 6-inch log facing. Inside the bunker, the bullet tumbled, fragmenting, sending splinters of lead and copper through the confined space. The Nambu gun went silent. Hutchison chambered another round. The T-13's gas system cycled smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and loading a fresh round from the magazine. He fired again at the same position. And again, 20 rounds in the magazine. Hutchison put 5 into that bunker position. Then he shifted fire. A second Japanese position 80 yards out had opened up, trying to support the first. Hutchison pivoted the heavy rifle. Acquire the muzzle flash. Fired. The massive rifle bucked. The round hit home. He fired 3 more rounds into that position. Silence. Around him, Marines were staring. Private Martinez would later describe it in a letter home. It sounded like God himself was angry. Each shot was a thunderclap. We could feel the concussion in our chests. The Japs just stopped shooting. The immediate tactical situation had transformed in under 2 minutes. 2 bunker positions that had pinned down an entire squad, positions that would have normally required either a tank or a satchel charge assault, casualties inevitable, had been neutralized by 1 man with 1 weapon. Hutchison's squad advanced, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The first bunker showed 5 holes punched through its front wall, each big enough to stick a fist through. Inside, 3 Japanese soldiers lay dead. The second bunker had taken 4 hits. 2 soldiers dead, 1 wounded and unconscious. By 0630 hours, as dawn broke fully over Bougainville, word was spreading through the battalion. Someone had a weapon that could kill bunkers. The company commander, Captain James Kowalski, requested Hutchison's presence at the command post. When Hutchison arrived, still carrying the massive T-13, Kowalski examined the weapon with undisguised awe. "How many magazines you got, Sergeant?" "4, sir. 80 rounds total. Make them count. I need you forward with every assault today." American forces deploying Bakemono-jū, special guns, that could defeat fortified positions from beyond visual range in jungle terrain. One Japanese commander on Saipan, in a report dated June 1944, wrote that American forces possessed rifles of bomber caliber that made traditional defensive positions untenable. Counterattacks were attempted. Japanese forces tried spacing bunkers farther apart, beyond the effective range they estimated for the T-13. But effective range proved longer than expected. They tried thicker log walls, 12 inches instead of 6. But .50 BMG rounds at close range could penetrate 18 inches of coconut log. They tried concrete reinforcement, pouring 4 inches of concrete behind log facings. But repeated hits from a T-13 would eventually crack and penetrate even reinforced positions. By mid-1944, approximately 300 T-13 rifles were deployed across the Pacific Theater. Operational reports showed remarkable statistics. Infantry companies with an assigned T-13 advanced an average of 34% faster than companies without. Casualty rates were 22% lower in T-13 equipped companies. Ammunition expenditure per yard of advance decreased by 40%. But the weapon had significant limitations that became apparent through sustained combat use. The T-13's brutal recoil wasn't just uncomfortable, it was operationally limiting. Even experienced shooters found that after firing approximately 40 rounds, accuracy degraded noticeably. The cumulative punishment to shoulders, wrists, and hands affected muscle control and sight picture. Combat reports noted that T-13 operators frequently rotated with assistant gunners after extended engagements, allowing recovery time. The weapon's weight, while necessary for managing recoil, created tactical constraints. At 46.2 pounds fully loaded, the T-13 was heavier than a bar, but lacked the bar's portability advantage of being designed from the start as a carried automatic weapon. The T-13's length, 48 inches, made it unwieldy in dense jungle. Operators learned to carry the weapon at the balance point, approximately 16 inches forward of the magazine well, but even so, negotiating thick vegetation while carrying what amounted to a semi-automatic artillery piece tested endurance. Reliability in Pacific conditions proved both better and worse than expected. The massive construction and wide tolerances meant sand and mud were less likely to jam the action compared to the tighter tolerances of a standard M1. Several operators reported submerging their T-13s during river crossings and, after basic cleaning, continuing to fire without malfunction. However, the complex gas system required more intensive maintenance. The gas cylinder needed cleaning every 200 rounds to prevent carbon buildup that could cause short-stroking, failures to fully cycle the action. The 20-round magazines, hand-fitted during manufacture, were not interchangeable. Each magazine was numbered and matched to a specific rifle. The flash signature, despite the suppressor, was enormous. Night firing revealed the weapon's position instantly and dramatically. Tracers from the Japanese side would converge on a T-13 firing position within seconds of the first shot. Tactical doctrine evolved. Fire, displace fire from a new position. Never fire more than 3 shots from the same location at night. Barrel life became an issue during sustained operations. The extreme pressures and velocities eroded the barrel throat and rifling. Springfield Armory rated barrel life at 5,000 rounds, but combat conditions, heat, humidity, inconsistent cleaning, reduced effective life to approximately 3,500 rounds. By Bougainville, in September 1944, some T-13s had fired well over 2,000 rounds and showed degraded accuracy. The Marine Corps established a depot-level barrel replacement program, but getting weapons back to depot facilities during active campaigns was often impractical. Ammunition sensitivity surprised operators. The .50 BMG round was designed for machine gun use with considerable variation in powder charge and bullet weight within specification. Machine guns firing hundreds of rounds continuously averaged out these variations. The T-13, firing semi-automatically, showed dramatic shot-to-shot variability with standard ammunition. At 300 yards, consecutive shots from the same magazine could impact 12 inches apart vertically. Springfield Armory eventually issued match-grade .50 BMG ammunition for T-13 use, with powder charges held to tighter tolerances. Match-grade ammunition reduced vertical dispersion to approximately 4 inches at 300 yards. The Japanese never developed a direct equivalent. Their Type 97 anti-tank rifle, chambered in 20 by 124 millimeters, was a manually operated weapon, essentially a bolt action, weighing 68 pounds and requiring a 2-man crew. It lacked the semi-automatic capability and portability that made the T-13 effective. German forces had the Panzerbuchs 39 anti-tank rifle, also manually operated, also a 2-man crew weapon. The Soviets fielded the PTRD and PTRS anti-tank rifles, 14.5 millimeters caliber, but again, these were manually operated and couldn't deliver the rapid follow-up shots possible with the T-13. What made the T-13 unique was the combination: semi-automatic fire, .50 caliber power, single operator portability. This combination existed nowhere else in any army during World War II. The engineering achievement was remarkable, but it came with compromises that prevented the weapon from being the universal solution infantry commanders initially hoped for. Combat operators developed specialized techniques. When engaging bunkers, the doctrine became: first round through the firing slit to suppress or kill the crew, follow-up rounds into the same point to enlarge the hole, creating a gap that would allow grenades or satchel charges to be thrown inside. When engaging in jungle terrain where targets weren't visible, operators learned to fire at sound. The distinctive chatter of a Nambu machine gun, the crack of Arisaka rifles, walking rounds onto the target through observation of impact effects on vegetation. The psychological impact on both sides was significant. American infantry gained confidence. They had a weapon that could fight bunkers on equal terms. Japanese defenders faced new uncertainty. Their fortified positions, previously safe from rifle fire, were now vulnerable. This psychological shift, difficult to quantify but evident in after-action reports and soldier accounts, changed the tactical calculus of Pacific jungle warfare. Production of the T-13 ceased in August 1945, immediately following Japan's surrender. Total production: 847 units. Of these, 112 were lost in combat, 67 were damaged beyond field repair, and 668 were recovered post-war. The weapons were classified secret retroactively in September 1945. The Army Ordnance Department wanted the T-13 program kept quiet. The reasoning was strategic. If American forces had developed a successful semi-automatic .50 caliber rifle, potential adversaries would pursue similar programs. Better to let the technology fade into obscurity. All surviving T-13 rifles were ordered returned to Springfield Armory by November 1945. Records show 652 weapons were actually returned. 16 others remain unaccounted for, presumably lost in the chaos of post-war demobilization or retained as unauthorized souvenirs. The returned rifles were stored in special climate-controlled facilities at Springfield Armory. Technical drawings, manufacturing specifications, and test data were classified and archived. The T-13 program remained classified until 1968, when a researcher at the Army Heritage Museum stumbled across references while cataloging World War II ordnance records. Even then, declassification was gradual. Full technical specifications weren't released until 1973. Surviving weapons weren't displayed publicly until 1981, when 3 examples went on display at the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. The legacy influenced post-war weapons development, albeit indirectly. When the U.S. military began developing anti-material rifles in the 1980s, weapons designed to engage light armored vehicles, radar installations, and communications equipment, engineers at Barrett Firearms Manufacturing studied the T-13 program. The lessons learned about managing .50 BMG recoil in a shoulder-fired weapon directly informed the design of the M82 Barrett semi-automatic anti-material rifle, adopted by the U.S. military in 1989. Modern anti-material rifles owe a conceptual debt to the T-13. The idea that one soldier with one weapon could engage and destroy hardened positions or light vehicles, an idea proven in Pacific jungles with the T-13, became standard doctrine by the 1990s. Special operations units in particular adopted anti-material rifles for precisely the mission profile the T-13 pioneered: precision engagement of high-value targets beyond the capability of standard infantry weapons. Interestingly, the T-13 designation was later reused by the military for completely different weapon systems, creating confusion in historical records. Researchers sometimes confuse the T-13 Garand with the later T-13 tank destroyer or other T-13 designated equipment. This naming overlap has contributed to the T-13 Garand's obscurity in popular military history. Sergeant William Hutchison survived the war. He returned to Montana in December 1945, married his high school sweetheart in January 1946, and worked as a civil engineer for the Montana Highway Department for 38 years. He rarely spoke about his wartime service. When he did, he focused on his buddies, the men he served with, not on the exotic weapon he'd carried. The T-13 was classified. He couldn't have discussed it in detail, even if he'd wanted to. In 1969, after the T-13 program's initial declassification, a local newspaper reporter tracked Hutchison down and asked about the monster gun. Hutchison's response, printed in the Billings Gazette on November 14, 1969, exactly 26 years after his first combat use of the T-13, was characteristically understated. It was a hell of a rifle. Kicked like a mule, but it did the job when we needed it. That's all that mattered. John Garand, the weapons designer, never received public recognition for the T-13 during his lifetime. He retired from Springfield Armory in 1953 and died in 1974, a year after the T-13's technical specifications were fully declassified. His obituary in the Springfield Republican mentioned his design of the M1 Garand rifle, but made no mention of the T-13 program. Private First Class Robert Martinez, who witnessed Hutchison's first combat use of the T-13, was killed in action on Iwo Jima in February 1945, 3 months before the war's end. He was 23 years old. His letters home, preserved by his family and later donated to the National World War II Museum, include his description of that November morning on Bougainville. Today, I saw the future of warfare. One man with one weapon changed everything. For decades, veterans who'd used the T13 in combat couldn't share their experiences publicly. The weapon was classified. Stories were suppressed. When a weapon was finally declassified, many of those veterans had passed away, their knowledge and experiences lost. Modern military historians estimate fewer than 200 combat operators ever fired the T13 in action. Of those, perhaps 24 are still alive as of 2024, most in their late 90s or over 100 years old. The few surviving T13 rifles have become prized artifacts. The three on display at the National Firearms Museum draw steady attention for visitors. One example, serial number 0047, shows combat damage, scoring on the barrel from shrapnel or on the stock from years of field use. That particular rifle, records indicate, was carried by Staff Sergeant Thomas Chun and saw action at Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, and Tinian before being returned to Springfield Armory in late 1945. The men who carried the T13 into combat, Hutchison, Chun, O'Brien, and hundreds of others whose names didn't make it into official records, weren't looking for recognition. They were solving a problem. Japanese bunkers were killing their friends, stopping their advances, turning each mile of jungle into a killing ground. Someone handed them an experimental weapon, brutal and barely tested, and said, "See if this works." They made it work. They absorbed the punishment, mastered the technique, and turned an engineering experiment into a battlefield advantage that saved American lives. Their story remained classified for decades, not because it was shameful, but because it was effective, so effective that the military wanted to keep it secret, so effective that modern anti-material rifles still employ principles the T13 pioneered. If this story connected you to a piece of history you'd never heard before, honor those men by hitting the like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of innovation, courage, and the human element of military history the textbooks often miss. Hit that notification bell. We've got more forgotten weapons, untold battles, and classified programs to explore. Drop a comment. Are you watching from somewhere these battles were fought? Did someone in your family serve in the Pacific? Let's build a community that remembers not just the famous victories, but the experimental weapons, desperate innovations, and ordinary soldiers who made those victories possible. To Sergeant Hutchison, Staff Sergeant Chun, Corporal O'Brien, Private Martinez, and the hundreds of others who carried the monster gun into the jungle, you didn't get the recognition you deserved during your lifetimes, but your story survives. And as long as we keep telling it, you haven't been forgotten.